Welcome back to the Stoic Mind channel. Here is we take an approach to modern Stoicism. If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe.
It's a well-recorded phenomenon that words are liable to develop different meanings in common modern usage compared to those that they had their origins in, and how people in the know would use them. This is doubly true for philosophical concepts. The word Epicurean, for example, has been transmuted from identifying the very sober and level teachings of the Greek philosopher Epicurus to being a synonym for wanton pleasure-seeking and hedonism. Stoicism hasn't suffered as severe a distortion. The modern understanding of what it means to be stoical is never showing any form of outward emotion regardless of all circumstances, good or bad, and indeed not having any emotions whatsoever. The entire species of the Vulcans in the popular science fiction franchise Star Trek exemplifies the popular definition. But it's easy to recognize an absence of outward emotion as not necessarily being a good thing. It is possible, after all, for someone to have a calm and blank exterior and yet be screaming inside. Having no internal emotion at all is also a less than ideal situation. Without emotion, how could one possibly enjoy life? The philosophy of Stoicism is fortunately neither of these things. It is an ancient way of encountering the world that emphasizes building happiness and peace from within, refusing to allow external factors to disrupt that calm. The ancient Stoics, with their seeming imperturbability by whatever befell them, would definitely have seemed almost robot-like from the outside, and to those who did not truly understand. Hence, it is understandable that the meaning of the word should be changed in this way. Being immune to the negatives and vicissitudes of life in this way is something we can all stand to benefit from. Our modern lives are so full of worries and insecurities, and peace and fulfillment are something most people try to find outside of themselves. Stoicism teaches that these are things we can only find from inside ourselves, and gives us the tools and mindset necessary to build them up. What this book will endeavor to do is to introduce the philosophy of Stoicism to the modern person, and make a case for how it can drastically improve our outlook and quality of life. It will begin with a brief retelling of the early history of Stoicism, followed by an examination of the mindset that Stoics employ, and the core tenet through which we interpret everything we come across. It will then move on to two extremely powerful practical exercises, one physical and one mental, by which we can gain control over our internal state. After that, it will give a rundown of some of the most powerful pieces of advice and implications of Stoicism as they have been passed down through the ages. Finally, because it is important to see the benefits of Stoicism in action, it will give some practical, more modern examples of people who have used it to overcome trials and adversity. And, because no single book could ever encompass the full breadth of Stoical wisdom, a short bibliography for the individual who wishes to explore further is given at the very end. Chapter 1. A Brief History of Stoicism. No picture of any way of life is complete without some knowledge of its origins and history. So we will begin with a brief overview of the birth of Stoicism and a look at some of its notable figures. The ancient school of Stoicism has its founder in Zeno of Citium, born around 334 BC to a family of merchants on the Greek island of Crete. Zeno himself became a merchant, and legend has it that sometime around the age of 30 he suffered a shipwreck while on a voyage to Athens, and lost his entire cargo of highly valuable purple dye. Shortly after making it to Athens, he is said to have been delighted by a work of the earlier philosopher Socrates. Asking the librarian where he could find another thinker of such caliber, he was pointed to the Cynic philosopher Crates of Thebes. Cynicism is one of those philosophies whose name has been heavily twisted in its common use. The Cynics, descended from the teaching of Antisthenes, a follower of Socrates, preached a life of virtue by living in accordance with nature and rejecting material pleasures. Zeno was so impressed by this philosophy as to become a follower, but not for long. Their lack of interest in scientific pursuits was too limiting for his inquisitive mind. Zeno left the Cynics and, by turn, went on to study under other descendants of Socratic thought, such as the Megarian philosopher Stilpo, the dialecticians Diodorus and Philo. and the Platonists Xenocrates and Polemo, moving on from each when he had learned his fill, though not without attracting critical comment from his peers. After 20 years of achieving fluency in the tenets of these varied schools, he departed to found a school of his own, setting up shop in a colonnade in the main square of Athens known as the Stoa Poikile, which translates to the painted porch. The Stoic philosophy was born, taking its name from its place of assembly. Very few first-hand works from the earlier ages of Stoicism survive today. Most of what is known from most of philosophy in that age comes from the 3rd century AD biographer of the philosophers, Diogenes Laertius. From him, we learn that Zeno was succeeded as the preeminent Stoic by Cleanthes immediately after his death, followed by Chrysippus and a succession of notable figures. This lack of first-hand documentation is a great shame, because the works of these early Stoics is alluded to in great detail in later works. Chrysippus in particular was lauded as having been the most influential in the works of those who followed after him. The works of the later Stoics are much better preserved, though, and the majority of the tenets of modern Stoicism are derived from the works of 3 later luminaries, Seneca the Younger, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius. Seneca was a tutor to the Emperor Nero in his youth, and later one of his principal advisors. Nero's reign is well known as a prime historical example of tyranny and cruelty, but it is said that during the period when Seneca had his ear, his reign was even-handed and competent. During his life, Seneca wrote many works, including a dozen essays on philosophy and 124 letters, many of which are still extant and have had a powerful effect on Stoicism through the ages. Epictetus was born circa AD 55 as a slave in the Roman Empire, and also received a crippling injury on his leg at a young age. He was given permission to pursue his passion for philosophy by his master, Epaphroditus, who was himself a freed slave as well as a secretary to Nero. He was freed in the year 68 and began to teach philosophy in Rome until AD 93, when the Emperor Domitian banished all philosophers from Rome. Fleeing to Nicopolis in Greece, he founded a philosophical school where he brought under his tutelage a young man named Arrian, who wrote down the discourses from his own notes of his master's teachings, as well as the practical manual, the Enchiridion of Epictetus. The works of Epictetus are particularly notable in that they provide advice that is most applicable in everyday life. His work is by far the most widely used and applied in modern Stoicism, and the vast majority of what is contained in this book is derived from it. Marcus Aurelius was born in the year AD 121 and was emperor of Rome from 161 until his death in 180. He was heavily influenced in particular by the writings of Epictetus, and while on campaign in the years 170 to 180, wrote a collection of thoughts for his personal guidance, in which he quotes heavily from his philosophical predecessor. Originally titled To Myself, the writings were after his death given the title Meditations, and have since been held as an example for good and conscientious governance by a great many statesmen since. Marcus Aurelius himself was a much respected figure during his life and reign. Lauded as a most prudent and conscientiously just emperor, he is remembered in history as one of the 5 good emperors of the Roman Republic. Many often commented on his calm and imperturbability in the face of adversity, including being unfazed in the face of insolence from his subordinates, which in many leaders would have elicited fits of rage and heavy-handed retribution. These are some of the founders of the philosophy of Stoicism: a slave, a teacher turned statesman, a merchant who lost everything, and an emperor of the largest domain that had ever existed at that time. Could a broader cross-section of humanity be possible? That Stoicism has its roots in such a varied sample of humanity speaks for its potential to hold a solution for people of all backgrounds. Chapter 2. The Stoical Mindset. Before we can go any further, we must first establish what it is that Stoicism stands for, and the mindset and beliefs that its adherents hold to. At its simplest, the goal of the Stoic, as first codified by Zeno, is happiness through a good flow of life, living in accordance with nature through the application of reason. What this means is to be able to take whatever may come in our stride, and maintain a reserve of inner peace regardless of our surroundings. The source of all of our feelings is from within, be it positive or negative. The source is not from outside of us. The goal, then, is to build on our inner peace and happiness while banishing fear, anxiety, and other negative emotions. A core tenet of Stoicism, and one of the greatest keys to building that inner reserve of positive emotion, is building a faculty of discernment between those things that are within our control versus those that are outside of it. And this faculty is important enough to warrant being discussed in much greater detail further on. It is impossible to balance both categories. Reaching for things that are beyond our control leaves us with far less energy to master those which are within our control, and is also subject to a great deal of hindrance and resistance, as well as being liable to engender disturbance and ill favor from others. Reaching for those things we can control is not subject to these negatives. Another truth about things that are outside our control is that they are generally within the control of others. Reaching for and desiring them opens us to control by others. The one who can give or take away what someone desires is by default their master. In order to avoid inadvertently becoming co-opted into servitude, we avoid desiring those things that are dependent on others. An important realization to make is that our perceptions of the things that happen to us are not real. They are wholly manufactured by our minds. Outside forces are not what make us feel a certain way. It is our own selves that do. If something happens that seems unpleasant to us, it is not the occurrence itself which is unpleasant. It is our own perception of it. It remains completely up to us to alter that perception so that it no longer has power over us. And it is also entirely within our power to alter our general outlook on the world so that the number of things that have the possibility of negatively affecting us is drastically reduced. Stoics also acknowledge and celebrate that being social creatures is a very important and integral part of our nature. A part of achieving a good flow of life is therefore living in harmony with our fellow human beings. Avoidance of conflict and accommodating the needs and happiness of those around us is therefore a very important part of the Stoic's life. Another very important and inescapable fact is that we all have a limited time on this earth, and eventually all of us are going to die. Stoics recognize and accept our impending mortality and adjust their lives and actions accordingly. Since life is so precious and brief, it is important not to spend it chasing after things that are not important, as well as to avoid wasting our energy trying to control things that we cannot. Life is too full of possibilities to die with regret and dissatisfaction. Therefore, we must use our efforts wisely and apply them to what is within our reach. Stoics aim to gather as much wisdom on how to live life as possible and to work to apply that wisdom immediately so as to spend as little time as possible living in a less than optimal manner. From these basic principles alone, it is possible to build a good image of the optimal life. It is a great bonus then that we have volumes of more specific writings that provide guidelines on how to achieve it. Among these writings are some practical exercises that the Stoic can undertake in order to build one's appreciation of what we already possess, curb the desire for things that are beyond our control from taking over our lives, and purge the fear, anxiety, and other negative emotions that seem to be part of the human condition. The following chapters will look at these techniques in detail, including the deeper rationale behind them, and further discussion on their benefits. Chapter 3. Differentiating Control. Most of our lives in the modern age is spent in the thrall of things that are partially or completely out of our control. We spend our energy wishing for and striving for what we do not have, and rail against our circumstances, failing to appreciate what we do have, and wasting our vitality worrying about things we have absolutely no power to affect. In the first instance, most of our lives is spent in the pursuit of contentment in achieving goals, amassing material possessions, and winning the acclaim of other human beings. Many manuals for success advise their reader to begin by creating a list of what they desire, and to dedicate their time and energy to attaining those desires. An approach that begins in this manner, by placing primacy in the acquisition of things and influence, is destined to cause measures of disappointment. For starters, pinning one's entire purpose in life on the attainment of external objects is bound to cause distress if, for whatever reason, those goals fail to be attained. While one's own effort is commendable and can achieve great things if focused in the right direction, there are many eventualities that can thwart even our noblest endeavors. Another point to bring up here is that goals often wear out their novelty once attained. Luxuries and pleasure in particular quickly become stale and ordinary once experienced more than a few times. through the simple mechanism of desensitization through psychological tolerance. As a result, once a goal is achieved, a new one has to take its place, and a new one after that, leading to a cycle that may wind up consuming an entire lifetime, with the individual never feeling fulfilled and content for more than a little while. The other barrier people find to their contentment is hassling themselves over the forces outside of their influence, whether by worrying over the effect they may have or blaming them for their lack of personal fulfillment. It is true that the news is filled with so much negativity, but many allow it to fill them with anxiety and to taint their thoughts. They lay blame on everything from the economy to the government to family, neighbors, and workmates for holding them back from experiencing true satisfaction, whether by preventing their aforementioned attainment of goals or being a burden on their psyche. All of this is not to say that Stoicism discourages the setting and attainment of goals or attempting to change one's circumstances. The early Stoics do preach the superiority of a life of simplicity, but far more important in the philosophy is the realization that external factors are far too unreliable to build one's happiness and self-identity upon. Fulfillment, they realized, has to come from within. The inner sphere is the only one that we have the power to command. The core of finding inner peace lies in the practice of discernment between the things we have control over versus the things we do not have control over. Discontent and unhappiness, according to Stoicism, arise from a lack of this faculty. Both the Enchiridion and the discourses of Epicurus begin by emphasizing this dichotomy, naming our opinion, aim, desire, and aversion as being within our control, and our body, property, reputation, and office as being outside of it. In other words, we can only count our own thoughts and emotions as wholly within our own power. Later thinkers have added on a third distinction, that of things partially within our control. It would, in fact, be prudent to posit more of a continuous scale of control versus lack of control, on which various things that affect us lie at various points. Working on the examples given by Epictetus, we could grade them thus. Given our vastly increased knowledge of the human brain, we know now that there is an element of our thoughts that is dependent on chemistry, but for the vast majority of psychologically healthy human beings, thoughts and emotions would lie very firmly on the side of things within our control. Our bodies, being a part of ourselves, but even more subject to our physical surroundings, lie on a midpoint between being within and outside of our control. We can affect our reputation by the way we act, but the bulk of it still lies in the minds of others, so it is further toward the side of things we cannot control. And our property and whatever office we hold are further outside of our control still. Stoics put this system in practice by analyzing every input that we process about what is going on around and within us, and ascertaining its position on the scale of control, and apportioning our efforts most heavily in the direction of things that we can control instead of those we cannot. It is the failure to do this that creates a lot of people's frustration with life. By focusing on the things we can control, we are far better able to achieve results. Most people end up jaded and frustrated by expending a great deal of energy and exertion on things they are less able to control, only to achieve little or no effect. This faculty of discernment therefore nips the source of a lot of worry and negative emotion in the bud. The past, which lies at the most extreme end of the things outside of our control, ceases to trouble us, as does the future, which lies only marginally closer to our influence. There is nothing we can do about world events, so they cease to trouble us. We give proportionate attention to things that are closer to home. To vote or run for office brings us some measure of control, but even if local political outcomes turn out against us, we are unperturbed because we knew they were only partially in our influence all along. An even more profound emotional consequence lies in the fact that all that exists in the realm of our minds is the only thing that is closest to our full and complete control. Stoics endeavor to exercise that control to the maximum by keeping careful watch of our internal state and adjusting it when it slides into the negative. At the basest, we acknowledge that we can control how we react to stimuli. All of our negative reactions come because we choose to react in a negative manner. By examining our reactions and quelling the negative ones as they arise, we become inured to the external circumstance and build our inner reserve of peace and happiness. This is the aspect of Stoicism that is closest to the common usage of the term: constancy of emotion regardless of external circumstances. Unlike the Stoicism of general understanding, though, The Stoic is not severe and emotionless. Rather, we are content and at peace. The inner state we want to achieve is well within our reach of command, and we can grasp it regardless of what is going on around us. Another aspect we can control is the management of our expectations and opinions of the outside world. While having goals and ambition is noble, and is the driving force of all of the innovation, artistic excellence, and social progress we have seen throughout the years, and most especially within the last couple of centuries, unfulfilled goals are the source of a great deal of unhappiness. As has already been mentioned, circumstances often conspire against the fulfillment of goals, and they simply cannot in themselves hold the key to our happiness. Stoics know, then, to append all expectations with a note that there is a possibility of their not being fulfilled, and that they alone will not be enough to breed satisfaction. There is a tendency in our modern society to engender the belief that there is no such thing as a dream that is too extravagant or too ambitious. This is simply not the case. Far too many people end up with wasted lives and shattered dreams because they believed way too hard in a dream that was too big to succeed, pinning their entire worth on achieving it. The expectations of the Stoic are also tempered by logic and reason. Probability, innate talent, and means are taken into account when building goals. The importance placed on each goal is then apportioned accordingly, and if every goal were to be achieved, then that would be great. Otherwise, should any goals remain outside the Stoics' reach, then there is no disappointment. Expectations were managed, and the goal was never truly important to our inner happiness anyway. A very important realization for the Stoic is that other individuals, while we may exert some influence over them through our communication and actions, lie very firmly on the side of things we cannot control. This affects, in particular, how the Stoic must view their standing in the eyes of others. No matter what, one's happiness cannot lie in what others think of them. This approach is very practical when facing harsh criticism from others. There are two possibilities that lie in being harshly judged. It may be that the judgment is accurate, that the criticizer has pointed out a major flaw in our behavior or our character. If this is the case, then the logical response is gratitude at the person who has offered the criticism, and an earnest effort on our part to rectify the issue. It is also possible that the criticism is false, in which case it is a case of misapprehension or a mere insult meant by the person who has given it to denigrate you or boost their own ego. If it is an innocent case of misunderstanding, the other person is deserving of help in understanding the truth, to the extent that they do wish to understand it in any case. In the case of a malicious insult or someone being unwilling to learn the truth, it is prudent to simply ignore the barb. There is nothing you or any other person can do to correct someone who is simply out to tear down. The deliverer of the insult is deserving of no riposte or reaction but pity, and it is enough to refuse to sink to the same base level as they have lowered themselves to. It is a simple fact that control over one's body is far from absolute. The body is a physical object, subject to the vagaries of the outside world. Even beyond the base of physical traumas we may be subjected to is the prevalence of all kinds of disease, some caused by outside agents, some by malfunctions arising in or coded into our very own genes. And yet, of all physical objects, our body is the one we have the most control over. Hence, it serves as the perfect archetype for those things that lie partially within our control. How we react to physical malady is dictated by how we react to other occurrences that are outside our control, with indifference, as it is something not in our sphere of influence. To quote Epictetus, sickness is an impediment to the body, but not to the will, unless it itself pleases. We can control our mental state with respect to illness, but we cannot prevent it from having happened in the first place. What we can do, however, is to undertake measures and perform actions, both physical and mental, that reduce the likelihood of illness overtaking us in the future. Medical science has discovered that a very large proportion of our immune response is dependent on our mental and psychological state. A positive outlook is highly conducive to healing and to preventing sickness. A great deal continues to be learned about the placebo effect, how patients who receive an inert sugar pill recover from illness at a far faster rate than if they had received nothing, as long as they believe they are receiving an active dose of medicine. As we continue to delve into this fascinating phenomenon, we have learned that the deception is not particularly necessary for a positive effect to be felt. It is simply the belief that healing is coming that causes it. A healthy, positive emotional state in general is also advantageous in avoidance of illness, and in this, the Stoic is already at an advantage. The sickness itself is outside our sphere of control, so we need not expend effort worrying about it, nor do we allow it to alter our internal balance towards the negative. Add to this that in practicing these techniques in our everyday life, we already have a positive outlook, and Stoics will generally live a life that is healthier and less prone to illness. We are also capable of controlling our own actions, and can affect our probability of contracting illness greatly in that way. We know that there are certain foods and activities we must avoid in order to avoid lifestyle illnesses such as cancer, heart disease, and diabetes, and we do so to the best of our ability and within the bounds of our circumstances. Practicing safe sexual intercourse, refraining from making disreputable acquaintances, ensuring there is as little that can cause us injury in our environment and immediate surroundings, all are within our power, and it is wise to exercise them. Should ill health befall us even despite these efforts, then it is the result of factors that truly were out of our control, and we can be at peace knowing there really was nothing we could do to prevent it. Chapter 4. Practical Exercises for Eliminating Negative Emotions and Promoting Inner Peace. Having touched on the importance of the distinction between things that are within our control versus those outside of it, versus those that lie somewhere in between, it is necessary to acknowledge that most of the times, our reactions to what happens to us are visceral, coded into our very genetic makeup. The same way as touching a hot stove elicits an involuntary jerk back of the hand, a cry of pain, and welling up of tears, the reaction to any loss is an almost physical pain. Neuroscientists have, in fact, ascertained that the same regions of our brain light up in response to both physically and emotionally painful stimuli. It makes a lot of biological sense exactly why we should have this sort of reaction encoded in us. Human beings are no different than the rest of our animal cousins. We are the product of a long process of evolution by natural selection, the same as any other. According to this extremely powerful and many times vindicated scientific theory, creatures that are better adapted and able to survive go on to reproduce and propagate their genes. Since creatures that are motivated to acquire and hold on to resources are more likely to survive, it is no wonder that a negative punitive reaction should arise to be associated with loss. Similarly with the loss of loved ones. In tribal times, in and during the eons when the pack was the unit of cohesion, they were very likely to be related to the individual and so hold similar genes. We fortunately have a capacity that sets us apart from other animals and frees us from the mere vagaries of our mammalian heritage, and that is the faculty of reason. Through reason, we are able to quell fear and the primal instincts that drive it. Stoicism drives us to develop and use that capacity for reason, as well as continually sharpen and exercise it. Following are two techniques that Stoics have used from the very beginning. Both Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius teach variations of them, to remove the fear of negative things happening, lessen the instinctive reflective bite of negative emotion that accompanies them when they do occur, and increasing the reserve of inner peace and satisfaction at the life, possessions, and circumstances we already have. Negative visualization. The first exercise that will be discussed is that of negative visualization. Just as they advise the creation and chasing down of goals as a primary objective in life, most success coaches preach the practice of visualization of oneself having attained those goals in order to create a drive to attain them. The harm this does to the mind through externalizing happiness onto things outside one's control and creating a possibility for disappointment when things do not go according to plan can be derived from what has already been discussed. But to add on top of this, that many of them have another rationale based on the pseudoscientific, unproven belief in the law of attraction. That holding the images of the things they want in their minds attracts or causes the universe to bring them to the believer. It is not the habit of a rational being to lay one's faith in such nebulous concepts. The Stoics, as far back as Chrysippus, employed a method completely the opposite of this approach. Rather than holding images of things that we desire in our minds, we should take time to imagine that we have lost something that we already possess. Imagine losing everything and being destitute, that those we love and who love us in turn have left us or have died, or that we have lost the use of a limb or one of our senses. Without a doubt, many of us find ourselves thinking about such things in dark and lonesome moments, and those thoughts fill us with anxiety and dread. Through repetition of accessing these thoughts in a controlled and objective manner, we become inured to the negative emotions that rise from them. As well as removing anxiety, negative visualization also steals us should we experience in reality the loss we have spent time visualizing. Since everything outside of us is outside our direct sphere of control, we should never spend our time worrying about it, and always be ready for the eventuality that we will at some point lose it. Negative visualization helps us to build that readiness. Another more positive practical effect is that when we consider how our lives would be without those things we already have, we appreciate them all the more. Negative visualization, therefore, builds our mental state from two angles: removing fear and other negative emotions from one side, and increasing our appreciation and contentment from the other. Yet another belief to be gained from negative visualization is a greater sense of perspective, engendered by the detachment necessary for its practice. Thanks to this, we are able to dispassionately weigh what we possess and much more objectively discern what is most important to us. Invariably, we find that many of the fripperies we trouble ourselves with, particularly the luxuries we have, are mere gilding on the flower that is our lives, and that the more basic, simpler pleasures, such as the company of our friends and loved ones, and the boundless freedom given by our minds, are by far the most precious. Negative visualization is something to be done occasionally. The objective is not to dwell continuously on potential misfortunes, or to live one's life in a pall of doom and gloom. Once the period, a short amount of time no more than a few minutes at a time, has passed, we can continue with our lives as they are, reaping the benefits it has imparted to us. Voluntary discomfort. The second method of removing our fear and increasing our appreciation of our circumstances is that of engaging in voluntary discomfort. Where negative visualization builds our mental resilience by imagining less than ideal situations, voluntary discomfort is the practice of exactly what it sounds like: exposing oneself to uncomfortable, less than ideal situations in order to become accustomed and inured to them. There are a lot of luxuries, especially in today's modern world, that we take for granted. Our homes are heated in the winter and air-conditioned in the summer, allowing us to enjoy a near constant external environment. We possess amazing technology that allows us to communicate with nearly anyone anywhere on the planet, and gives us access to more entertainment at the click of a finger than we could possibly consume in 1,000 lifetimes. Our clothing, our shelters, our modes of transportation, all are optimized to give us the maximum of comfort and ease. They've become a part of the tableau of our lives, things we have grown to accommodate and no longer recognize as the amazing innovations that they are. There are also far simpler conveniences that we take for granted. In the developed world today, even the poorest of us have access to 3 meals a day, something that would have been reserved for kings in the past. No matter your financial situation, as long as you are reading this book, you are more fortunate than the vast majority of human beings that have ever lived and even that are alive today. And you too could stand to gain a better appreciation of that through practicing voluntary discomfort. In order to do so, pick anything that makes your life easier or more enjoyable in some way, and choose to go without it for a little while. Through doing so, you will gain a greater appreciation of it, and also gain a measure of resilience should it at any time and for any reason become unavailable to you. Taking the examples given above, making a habit of leaving the air conditioning off on occasion on a hot summer day, not for a long time and not very often, just enough to get a feel of what it's like were you not to have it at all. Not only will you gain a much greater appreciation of the benefit of cool temperatures throughout, but should there perhaps be a power outage, as can sometimes happen during particularly strong heat waves when the load on the power grid rises beyond its capacity due to everyone having their air conditioning on, you will find you do not even have to exert much mental effort in balancing your emotions. You've experienced unadjusted heat several times before and have grown used to it. The same goes for unplugging your electronic devices for a while and enduring the silence and loneliness they are designed to banish, or for taking the bus or walking somewhere instead of driving. Even back in the days of the ancient Stoics, long before the technological revolutions that brought us these conveniences, they would shed the few comforts that they had to build their resilience. Comforts that even we could stand to learn to live without. Running barefoot, going out in the cold without warm clothing, and fasting for a period of a day or so are age-old methods of voluntary discomfort we can practice ourselves. the better to appreciate our shoes, our clothes, and the meals we eat every day. Voluntary discomfort sounds awfully close to masochism to some people, but rest assured, it could not be farther from it. Like negative visualization, the point is to do it for short stretches at a time, not to continually deny oneself or to revel in the act of deprivation. Some may also bring up the objection that voluntary discomfort is too difficult or unpleasant, that some people have a naturally higher threshold for discomfort which the average person does not possess. But in the same way as it is possible to become used to pleasurable inputs, we can grow our resilience to pain. If voluntary discomfort seems disagreeable to you, start small. Engage in only mildly unpleasant deprivation for a short amount of time. As time goes on, you will find yourself able to withstand greater discomfort for longer lengths of time. The benefits of voluntary discomfort go beyond just the mental. The self-discipline and resilience it builds are applicable in almost every sphere of one's life. Enduring one form of discomfort very easily transfers itself over to others, and Stoics who practice it find their willpower in general to be greatly increased. You will be better equipped to endure and push through whatever comes your way, to put in that extra hour of work or few minutes of exercise, to refrain from eating the delicious but unhealthy foods you need to avoid in order to maintain your health, and will be much better equipped to attain your external goals. Chapter 5. General Precepts and Advice. The full scope of implications of Stoic philosophy, as well as the techniques available to us to achieve inner harmony and well-being, are massive, far beyond the reach of a book this size. The earliest complete writings we have, including those of Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, are volumes long, and later, more modern thinkers have added their own wisdom and have interpreted and opined on the Stoic lifestyle as well. This chapter will make an effort to summarize some further general principles according to which we can model our lives to reflect the Stoic way. Some of them have already been touched upon, but will be discussed again along with some further implications that they hold. Everything comes from within. This is the central core principle around which Stoicism is built, so it really cannot be repeated enough. It pervades every other teaching and colors the Stoics' view on every aspect of life. We've already seen how this means that we are ultimately responsible for our own mental state, but it has further implications for the way we think about ourselves and how we interact with the outside world around us. We are the ones who can shape our character and can lay a foundation of how we present ourselves, upon which the perception of others can be built. If we wish to be seen a certain way, it should be sufficient for us to appear that way to ourselves. We must hold ourselves according to our own personal principles and laws, and live according to our aspirations. Character is an impossible thing to fake. How we are when we are alone is the same way as we will be when we are with others, so we should aim to avoid any duplicity to others or ourselves, and act as we would regardless of who is around. We should hold our integrity and self-respect in highest esteem, and never act in a way that would violate that. Our actions are our own, and we should always act in a way that is harmonious with our beliefs. It is inevitable that doing so will often sometimes bring us into conflict with others. Regardless of what is said or thought of us, we should always act in a way that we believe is right and in accordance to our beliefs. Since it is impossible to exert full control over the thoughts and opinions of others, we should not trouble ourselves if our actions bring us ridicule, or we encounter people who are hostile or abrasive to us. As long as we have acted according to our conscience, we should not be concerned by this. If it is our actions that are the cause of this resistance, but if our actions are pure and according to our standards, then we have no reason to be perturbed. Persistence and sticking to principle has a habit of breeding admiration. Since the mind is the seat of the self, it is the only thing we can exert full control over. It is prudent to exert that control to the full, and to feed and nurture the mind. The Stoic seeks wisdom wherever it may be found, and works to apply it to internalize it, as well as building its resilience and fortitude by employing the techniques presented in the previous 2 chapters. It is important to exercise it by seeking to build its store of information to sharpen it through discourse and dialogue. Relationships to externalities. To the things that are to varying degrees outside our control, we should give an appropriate amount of attention. Everything that happens has 2 aspects by which we can interact with it, one by which it can be handled, and one by which it cannot. Invariably, the side by which it can be handled relates it to our internal mind and brings it into a realm we can control, our inner response to it. It remains completely up to us to discern this angle and react accordingly. It is never advisable to place great importance in anything we have that is external to our will. Loss is inevitable, and if we put our possessions and circumstances on a pedestal, we open ourselves up to negativity when they are altered or taken from us. The attitude to have when faced by loss is to remember that whatever we have lost was never really ours. Therefore, we have not lost, but whatever it is has been restored, given back up to the rest of the universe. Further from this, we should not take pride in the attributes of anything that is not directly our own, in the sense of having direct control over it. Having a nice car, a beautiful house, or an attractive partner does not mean that we possess those attributes ourselves. This also does extend to our own physical and social attributes. We should not be proud if we are good-looking, eloquent, or athletic. Even those aspects are outside our direct control and vulnerable to loss. If, then, we do lose any of these possessions or attributes, our personal worth is in no way diminished. We should not demand for things to happen according to our wishes, but should wish for things to happen as they do. This way, we eliminate a great source of strife and enable ourselves to live in sync with the world around us. Epictetus uses an analogy of looking at life as being like a Roman-style banquet. Dishes were passed around at random, and there was no guarantee of getting something particular at any time. If a dish is brought to you, take of it. If something passes you by, let it pass. Never aim to hoard or keep the platter for yourself. It may have begun to seem like Stoicism advises complete passivity, or that we should never ever build goals or have aims we wish to achieve. The truth is quite contrary, in fact. What these techniques give us is the ability to discern which goals are important and worth chasing, and give us the resilience necessary to overcome setbacks and the fortitude to persevere when from the outside things seem to be failing to go our way. Marcus Aurelius counsels us not to think that what is difficult is impossible, but rather to consider everything that is possible to be within our reach. We should, however, weigh the importance of everything and always consider everything that is necessary for something to be achieved. The actions we must take and the sacrifices we must make, as well as the aftermath and the consequences of achieving it. If your goal is to be an actor, always bear in mind the things you will have to do to achieve that. You will have to take acting classes, spend hours rehearsing and perfecting your craft, and perhaps have to deal with people who are very opinionated and difficult to work with. You will have to be able to take criticism, some of which may not be kindly delivered. Luckily, thanks to your stoical mindset, you are doubly equipped to deal with this, and apply it accordingly. You should also be prepared for the life you will have to live should you land in the statistical majority of people who have chosen your path, constantly searching for work and taking jobs that might not be the pinnacle of your dreams, such as being an extra or working commercials and bit jobs, as well as the financial instability that comes with it. You should also be prepared to live with the consequences should you achieve the highest level of your chosen profession, never being able to find a private moment when in public, thanks to constantly being recognized by strangers, as well as the difficulty of finding true and sincere friends when you are wealthy and famous. This goes for any possible path. Entering politics, becoming a musician, a research scientist, or an entrepreneur. If the consequences of both the average and best, and indeed worst-case scenarios, are worth following your dream, then by all means, go for it. It is not the man who has little, but the one who always wants more who is poor. And it is far better to die of hunger while happy than be rich and filled with unhappiness and anxiety. Do not always aim to be busy, because that is not necessarily being productive, but is often the sign of a haunted mind. And always remember, if you enter no fight that is beyond your ability to win, you will never be defeated. Relationships with other people. The social aspect of humanity is an integral part of our nature, and therefore Stoics hold our interactions with other human beings to be an important part of life. Living in peace and accord with others is essential, and we recognize others as having the same ultimate goal as we do, to live a life filled with harmony and well-being. Their minds are the farthest sphere from our control. Therefore, we should not even dedicate a single bit of our energy to trying. We cannot know the motivations that others have behind their actions. Therefore, we cannot let those alone dictate how we in turn act towards them. If someone behaves unfairly or injuriously to us, we should not act with the same in turn, but with justice in accordance to our own conscience. It is impossible for them to hurt us unless we allow them to. We should not judge the actions of others to us as good or bad, but simply as they are. If someone steps on your toes, they have not done you evil. They have simply stepped on your toes. Simply move on with your life without letting it consume you. With regards to the company we keep, we should aim to maintain relationships with people who will build and nurture us, and avoid those who are a negative influence. The building and nurturing can take an intellectual form. We should seek the company of people from whom we can learn and with whom we can converse on weighty, complex issues. To quote a popular truism, if you're the smartest person in a room, then you're in the wrong room. Always aim to congregate with people from whom you can get a better picture of how the world works. The nurturing can also be emotional and psychological. Aim to be around people who will lift your spirits and inspire you to be the best that you can be. Conversely, people who add nothing to your knowledge except for useless trivialities, and those who will bring you down or cause you to abandon your morals should be avoided. Of course, if one is truly living by Stoic principles, they will be unperturbed by any negative influence negative people may try to exert. But what use would a Stoic have for such people in the first place? We are the average of the company we keep. Whether that is because that company has shaped us after itself, or we have found ourselves drawn to that company, we should find reason to worry if we find ourselves keeping the company of disreputable people. This is not a call to culture smugness in oneself. In fact, Epictetus warns heavily against smugness or fostering a feeling of superiority to those around us. It is impossible to achieve perfection. To believe that one has is to stop to try to become better. We are called to recognize this and to always continue working on ourselves. Mortality. We have no control over the time on which death will take us. We can take as many preventative measures as we can that will reduce our likelihood of dying in certain ways, but certain causes of mortality will always be beyond our power to turn away. This does not mean that we have cause to be anxious. It simply means that death is just another thing we should not overly concern ourselves about. The only thing that is within our reach is how we live our lives, and it is up to us to live in a way that is consistent with our principles. Death is nothing to be afraid of. It is our notion and idea of death that causes fear. Death is simply nothingness, and according to Seneca, nothingness can neither be good or evil. When we lose those closest to us, we must remember that they did not belong to us in the first place. We therefore should not mourn as if the world is ending. Ours moves on, as does that of everyone else who still lives. While we live, we have the obligation to ourselves to live our lives to their best and in harmony with our principles. That way, when the end comes, should it come in a manner that allows us to know that it is coming, we will have no disappointment and no regret. Summary. Hopefully, the case has been made for why and how you should apply the tenets of Stoicism to your life. It is not expected for you to simply take what has been presented here on the mere faith that it can be applied to our modern mind, or that it truly can impart the benefits that it promises. Many great, brave, or simply average people have utilized the very techniques and wisdom condensed here to face adversity and better their lives. Stoicism has, quite understandably, had a great following among military personnel. Marcus Aurelius himself was a well-seasoned campaigner and wrote much of his work in order to maintain his own inner balance when faced with ordering and taking to battle to expand and defend the borders of his realm. The most notable military follower of Stoical philosophy in recent times was U.S. Navy pilot James Stockdale, who was shot down in Vietnam and taken as a prisoner of war. He endured torture, beatings, and being subjected to solitary confinement in a tiny cell and in leg irons. When interviewed about how he survived later, he gave a powerful anecdote that perfectly illustrates the dangers of putting one's faith in things out of their control. The prisoners of war who were constantly optimistic that they would be released soon were the ones who succumbed to heartbreak and despondency, and eventually died when rescue delayed in coming. In his own words, "This is a very important lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. Another recent example who endured inhumane treatment is Rhonda Cornum, who was shot down over Iraq during the Gulf War. She, similarly, was subjected to inhumane treatment, including sexual assault by one of her captors. Despite this maltreatment and abuse, she chose to maintain control by keeping a firm grip on her perception of it. In her own words, the assault ranks as unpleasant. That's all it ranks. Similarly, we should maintain the same sense of perspective on what happens to us. By no means are the only examples military. Viktor Frankl, a Jewish Austrian psychologist, was a prisoner in Auschwitz, the most infamous concentration camp during World War II. Despite being in one of the most awfully cruel situations that a human being could ever be in, he chose to maintain control over his own mindset and did not let the situation overwhelm him. To quote him from his book, Man's Search for Meaning, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. These are but 3 examples of people who have chosen to maintain control over what they could while in terrible situations. That they could survive such privations while maintaining their own inner sense of self is a testament to the power of this model of thought. There is quite probably nothing the average human being will ever suffer that will come close, so adopting Stoicism should be very ample in helping us through our walk of life. Further reading. This small book by no means covers the full extent of what is encompassed and implied by Stoicism. By all means, take the opportunity to read as widely and wildly as possible in order to find both the exact application of Stoicism that works for you and to internalize the things you will need to do to achieve inner peace. Presented here is a short reading list of books and sources that would be adequate places to begin the wider journey. The earliest surviving works of Stoic philosophers, the Epistles of Seneca, the Discourses and Enchiridion of Epictetus, and the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius are still available, and best of all are in the public domain and therefore free. A quick search on the internet will uncover downloadable versions, though if one prefers paper, there are print versions available as well. The quality of the translations is excellent and in perfectly easy to understand English, and most of the wisdom they contain is still very much applicable today. A Guide to the Good Life, The Ancient Art of Stoic Joy by William B. Irvine is the most popular manual on modern Stoicism available today. As the title suggests, it focuses very much on using Stoical techniques to find and build an inner reserve of happiness. James Stockdale wrote a number of books that heavily reference the philosophy that allowed him to persevere through the ordeal of being a prisoner of war. One notable one is Courage Under Fire, testing Epictetus's doctrines in a laboratory of human behavior, in which he wrote of how his capture served as a test of the principles he had learned from his reading of the ancient sage.